Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest episode of the Adopt 365 podcast. My name is Barry Coons, and I'd like to introduce my co hosts, Anthony Charman
Hello.
and Megan Warren.
Hi, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, both. So today's show is going to be all around the metaverse. For those of you that maybe have been living in a cardboard box, haven't heard people talking about this, a quick search on Wikipedia says the metaverse is a virtual reality space in which users can interact with a computer-generated environment and other users. So that's a very broad use case. I think it's been around since the 90s, the concept. I think they said it was first introduced in a book in the 90s. Before we dig deep into the metaverse, what it could mean to you, what it could mean to your business, maybe what is it today, we normally get on with a bit of just talking around what we've been doing in Microsoft 365 first. If this is the first time you've listened to the Adopt 365 podcast, can I urge you to subscribe to the podcast in your podcast app, like it, click the bell on the notifications, all of those good things to subscribe to the podcast really does help us just get out to more people and share more of this good content. So please tell friends and pass it on. We're really keen to be speaking to more people. And if you'd like to be part of the Adopt 365 podcast, if you'd like to come and talk to us, talk to our champions that are also involved with the podcast, please reach out to us. Probably Megan is the best person to reach out to. You find her on LinkedIn and say you want to come and join us and talk about a subject. So to get us started then, Anthony, what is the kind of one thing that's really stood out to you recently or you've been spending a lot of time thinking about?
Well, it's two things really. Just a really quick one, which is that this button seemed to appear in my Outlook the other day, which says share to Teams. And one of the things I spend a lot of time talking to people about is, how we're going to use different methods of communication in the business and how we're going to, move away from using email and be able to, you have that communication within Teams so we can put it in the right context and manage it there. So this button's really useful. So if you've got an email coming in from the outside world and you want to share it in a Teams channel, you can just click that button, click the team, click the channel, press that button, and off it goes. And then you can have a conversation with your colleagues around the subject of that email. So it's just a nice interface between traditional email and being able to communicate and collaborate around that with your colleagues and the wider members of your team in the Teams environment. So that's my number one thing. The other area I've been doing a lot of work on recently has been Microsoft Teams rooms. As you know, I think we're probably bored of people saying this, but as people are going back to work, we're looking at how we can set environments up for hybrid meetings and how we can make it an equal experience for people inside their organization as if they're, and people outside of the organization, and bring them all together in a level playing field for meetings. Then Teams Rooms is doing some really good stuff in that area. And the Microsoft Front Row aspects of Teams Room is really putting Microsoft putting some real effort into developing that environment. It's in public preview. It's not quite there yet, but you can see where it's going, and we can see that it's going to integrate really well with the Loop components that are starting to appear in Teams, and enable us to really create a nice collaboration space where people can work without being hindered and share and collaborate wherever they are. So those are the two things I've been looking at over the last week or two.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Anthony. It's good to see that things are ever progressing, and good to see when some of the more features come out in the next couple of months. Megan, what has piqued your interest recently?
So mine's not necessarily a feature as such. As Anthony said, with hybrid working becoming the norm now, what I've been working on recently is just going back to those basics. So everyone's changing their way they're working again. People are in the office, people are at home, people are on the road again, which is amazing to see. However, some old bad habits seem to have crept in for some people. The emails have started going up, etc. So it's just working on those, as we call them, almost brilliant basics, those really key sort of standardization pieces across organizations, across everything, to make sure, one, you're collaborating and communicating in the same way, that everyone knows where to find that communication, etc. And almost collaborating and communicating in the right way. So still using Teams when it's needed, still using email because it's never going to go, but really reducing that email still. So going back to basics, revisiting those basics and getting them right again as we're changing the way we work.
Fantastic. I think it's one of those really important things that as new people come into the company, as technology improves, and as people need to do different things in Microsoft Teams, you need to have the right ways inside the organization to allow you to do that. I suppose a really good time to plug our .365 platform, the knowledge base with all of the content, with monthly live training that can be really helpful as a secondary learning resource to those people that are looking to share that knowledge inside their organization. So from my perspective, I've been looking at lots of stuff, but something that really stood out to me this month, and it's probably a nice segue into our next conversation, are the RealWear compatible Microsoft Teams headsets. So here at Computer World, we've recently onboarded them as a technology. The RealWear headsets are a headset that you're able to wear that have got a screen just under one eye. They've got a camera, they've got a torch, they can connect to helmets, baseball caps and things like that. So if you have a use case where you have someone that is working remotely that needs support from someone that may be central or something like that, so certainly in engineering environments, anything where there is kind of a hands-on element, this allows the people that are supporting you centrally to have that true first-person view on what's going on. So that could be fixing a piece of machinery, it could be looking at a medical diagnosis or something like that. So this was certainly really interesting. First saw them at Microsoft Ignite. It's great now that at Computer World we're able to help and support customers with those, and it was great to see that in action. It's really good to see a demonstration of a headset integrated with Microsoft Teams and how that can completely change the flow of a working environment. Previously, where you may need to send the specialist out to each of the places there's problems, you could send someone that is maybe on a learning path to speak to one central specialist. So all of a sudden, that specialist can now support 5, 6, 10 different people, whereas previously you'd need 10 different specialists or a prolonged period of time to be able to deliver the same outcome. So they were referring to this as assisted reality. So not artificial intelligence, not virtual reality, but assisted reality. So it's really good to see that. Maybe we'll get them on the podcast, although I don't quite know how a headset will work as part of a podcast. Maybe we'll have to make a limited edition video only version of the Adopt 365 podcast to show what that can do. So as we go on to the main subject of the day, we're going to be talking about the metaverse and what is it, what does it mean, and ultimately, what are our thoughts upon it? Because I think where we are at the moment, it's probably too early to truly say what it's going to be and how it's going to be adopted and how it's going to change our working lives. I know where we are in the UK at the moment. Hybrid working is now a real thing. Megan and I are both here in the Computer World offices. Anthony is remote. We're now changing the way that we work, but is there further evolution that needs to happen? So Anthony, why don't you get us started on the metaverse? What are your first thoughts? Let's get a conversation going.
It's a difficult one, really, because I'm eternally skeptical about these things. But I think my first thoughts are that I think the technology is getting there. I think one of the main things that I think about when I'm talking to people is that, and you can't see this now, but because it's a podcast, my hands do a lot of the talking, and therefore that without that and without being face to face with people and without people seeing our facial expressions, I miss a lot of what is going on within a meeting room. And I don't know if the technology is there yet to actually help us to to replace those things within the metaverse. I've been working from home throughout the COVID period, been to the office 3 or 4 times. It's really, really good to see people. I do miss not seeing people. And I don't know how much more it's going to add to be able to see an avatar of someone. So yeah, I'm skeptical about it, but I think the technology is getting there to enable us to deliver it. I look at it from 2 points of view. I think it works really well in a gaming environment, and I think that's been going on for a long time. Kind of first-person shooters and cloud-based environments for that have worked really well. But I also think what we need to find is where it works really well in a business sense and business drivers behind it. But I do think there would be the 2 things that drive it. One will be led by entertainment, and secondly, we'll then see how practical it is and how usable it is in a business environment.
Definitely. I think just to take us back a step. So the bit that I said at the beginning, it's a virtual reality space in which users can interact with a computer-generated environment and other users. So this is basically a way for people to escape from what is in front of them and be somewhere else. So almost that. What was it in Star Trek? They used to be able to kind of flick the
Teleport.
communicator and teleport somewhere else. Whilst we haven't quite invented the technology to teleport somewhere else, this is probably the closest you can get to kind of going somewhere else, and it happens to be that virtual world. And there's two main technologies we've probably seen about this. I don't know, Megan, if you just want to talk about those two technologies and what you've seen of them so far.
Yeah, so the two that I've really sort of explored so far is Microsoft Mesh, which they announced at Microsoft Ignite. Gosh, it feels like it was only yesterday, but I imagine it was probably a year or so ago now. And talking about Mesh and how that's really going to come into play in sort of Teams meetings, really expanding that Teams meeting when people are around a whiteboard, they can all come together with their avatars and actually all draw on the whiteboard together, which feels more it even feels more collaborative than just having a whiteboard in a Teams meeting as such. So I feel like the Microsoft piece is really going to lead the work-related virtual reality space. The other one, of course, is the Facebook one, and there's a lot of talk going on at the moment with Facebook. And is it Workrooms? I think it's called, but they've also got a home one, etc. as well. So that's Facebook's version of that. Again, if you're using Facebook Workplace, the Facebook Workrooms will probably be really useful. I'm a Microsoft person through and through, so I don't think it's as good personally, but there may be a little bit of bias in there as well. But I'm like Anthony, there's a little part of me that sort of looks at it and goes, oh, how will this come together? But actually, when you start seeing it come into play, when you start watching these videos of people actually using it and demonstrating it, I just think it looks really incredible. I don't think it's going to replace real world meetings. I don't think it can replace that. There's still a need for that. But for people who live maybe in Manchester, for example, if we employed someone in Manchester and they couldn't be here for a company day or something like that, maybe it's a good alternative and a good way for them to interact with us as well.
So as an example, Manchester's probably about a couple of 100 miles away from our head office. It's not specifically people from Manchester would really suit the use case with Metaverse.
No discrimination.
So yes, it's that Horizon workspace and Horizon Home from the Facebook side. Facebook have obviously even gone as far as renaming their parent company Meta in terms of what they're doing, and certainly anybody that follows Mark Zuckerberg at the moment will see everything that he is doing, is looking at, is all about the Metaverse. It's about AI for the Metaverse. It's about user experience for Metaverse. It's about the devices for Metaverse. It's all of those things certainly that we're seeing from Mark Zuckerberg, probably today leading the way in terms of the people that we think. They obviously acquired Oculus technologies a few years ago that are one of the primary vendors of making the virtual reality headsets. But yeah, it was really good to see that Microsoft piece. It started off, I don't know if you remember back then, you watch it, they did quite in-depth virtual reality things and took us off to a very psychedelic world of people dancing around a fireplace inside a VR environment, which was a little bit strange. I wasn't quite sure what to think about that. I suppose
Yeah.
art of the possible. You could be anywhere doing anything, I suppose, is the example. But Anthony, I don't know if you remember, as part of the launch and what they've showed since, obviously the large IT consultancy firm, or the large consultancy firm Accenture, were one of the main people to take Microsoft Mesh and deliver some experiences. I think delivering 60,000 VR headsets to their users and using it for onboarding. I don't know if you've seen that video or remember from it. What were your thoughts around that essential use case, if indeed you can remember it?
Yeah, I do remember it, and yeah, I do remember those numbers of kind of 60,000 headsets, that VR headsets. I just thought that's quite expensive. I can't imagine many of our clients making that commitment. But I think it's, what that enabled them to do was to in effect gather people into a place to talk to each other and communicate with each other in this kind of 3D world. I mean, when people talk about the difference between the internet and the metaverse. People kind of talk about you go on the internet and you go into the metaverse. So I just, that's quite false in a way, because when you're in that metaverse, you choose how you project yourself. You choose what your avatar looks like. They really do seem to have a problem with legs in that environment, don't they? I don't know whether it just takes too much computer power to generate legs that work and track legs that work, but they seem to have just missed those off. But it's kind of, it worries me that it gives people the ability to project an image which isn't them. A little bit like, we always put our best life on Instagram. You'll be able to project your real life, your best life in the metaverse and communicate with people, and it'll be false in a way. I keep going back. Whenever I talk about the metaverse, I always think about the film The Matrix, which was well ahead of its time, because the Matrix in effect was a world where the human person was locked in was locked into an environment, almost had atrophied into being a useless thing, but was just plugged into a metaverse in effect, and they were living this second life in there. And I just worry about that, because although you can project a real nice image of yourself into the metaverse, when you take your headset off, you're faced back with what you've actually got. You may have an awesome view outside, of your villa in your metaverse world, but when you take your headset off and you're sat in your damp flat in somewhere, there's going to be that real mind shift, and I think it will cause a lot of trouble mental health wise, really be a challenge to people. So I can't imagine a world where we're all wearing headsets all the time. I think there's going to be a time and a place to have a video meeting like this. There's going to be a time and a place when we say, right, we want a more immersive experience. We're going to do a whiteboarding session together. We're going to want to, banter backwards and forwards and share some stuff and and read each other's reactions and things like that. When we'll say, right, let's go deeper and let's put our headsets on and go into that immersive environment. But yeah, I'm still quite skeptical. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but there's a lot of thoughts going on in my head about this whole area at the moment.
You didn't say it could be chaos yet, so
No.
it's all good.
Yeah.
And I think you're completely right. I think there is a whole area around not just mental health, but also around governance, also around how do we make sure that these environments are safe. Children getting involved in these worlds, they are very immersive. There were recent news stories as to how, I think it was Oculus or someone like that in these virtual worlds were having to look at sexual harassment situations that were happening in there, and females being put at risk and things like that. So this is another world, this is another environment, and going into those kind of environments does have its own set of considerations and cautions. I don't know, Megan, back to the Essentia thing, did you have what was your review on that kind of Essentia demonstration that we saw as part of Microsoft Ignite?
Like I said when I spoke a moment ago, the whiteboard piece is really good. I do see a real use case of that. I think they even showed somebody picking up a post-it note off of a whiteboard and moving it across. And that's just a different experience than what we have today. We've done things with clients, with internal, where you actually get post-it notes and you stick them all around the room, and it's really good fun. You do that in a Teams meeting, it works, you get the job done, but is it as fun? Probably not. So it is just filling that almost, I want to say, void that we currently have been missing, where we can't all be together, that I think is really good. I don't know if I see in the workplace, I think they had a few people just stood around chatting, almost as a bit social. I don't know that I really get that piece at the moment. I don't know that I'd put my headset on to do the social piece of just going in to see some avatars and stuff like that as well. That bit doesn't really gel with me at the moment. The other bit that I almost want to say concerns me is when people were using their avatars in normal Teams meetings. So rather than having their video on, they had their avatar on. Now, for people who don't like putting their video on, and like Anthony says, want to show maybe a better self, then that's good, because if they didn't previously have their video on, at least they now have their avatar on. They can, gesture a little bit, pull a few facial expressions, and you get a bit more of that insight. The bit I don't want to happen is people who used to have that camera on now just put their avatar on because they don't want people to see them, because whilst the avatar is a little bit better than no camera, it's certainly not as good as seeing someone's real facial expressions, etc. Because you see it twitch a little bit, but you don't see that full facial expression of someone rolling their eyes or something like that that you see in those meetings or in real life. I must also say here, I don't like the reactions with avatars when they sort of go and put a heart like this when they're supposed to be liking something during a Teams meeting. I would never sit on a Teams meeting and go like with a heart with my hands. It's just not what you do. So I think there's still a way to go to make it a little bit more realistic for people to truly engage with it and truly use it in the right way.
Yeah, I watched
I think
a TED talk, which the guy was doing it into a virtual audience and to a physical audience, and he's like wearing a full motion capture suit so that he can be, they can get as much of the reactions and his movement to the virtual audience. But I don't want to have to be wearing a virtual capture suit to do that, and I certainly don't want to be wearing a headset when I'm in a room with physical people. So it does seem, I mean, it's a real challenge if you want to deliver it in a hybrid environment, because you've got to have be dressed in a certain way to make it effective in the virtual world, and yet if you've got people in the room with you, you'd rather that they saw you as you are. So yeah,
I think we're on a journey here, aren't we? And certainly how the technology sits today is likely to be very different to where it sits in 5 to 10 years. I think Mark Zuckerberg said in 5 to 10 years, you'll be able to wear a set of glasses that looks like a set of glasses, and you will be able to be in an augmented reality environment. At that point, I think it becomes a lot more natural, a lot more real. The thing for me that really stood out about the Accenture example was one of the examples they gave was around onboarding. And obviously, I think we've probably all had the challenge during the lockdown period to onboard new employees during the lockdown period, or now when we're recruiting people not so close to the head office and things like that. It could be a real challenge to kind of get those social situations to see some people. And what I really liked in the Accenture environment, during a onboarding period, you can ask people to do stuff. Actually, we're going to send you a headset, go and join this thing at a few clicks. There's going to be some friendly colleagues there that are there to have a chat with you. And it can feel maybe more like a social situation. There was a good example in the video where there was someone, I think from the China office, talking to someone from the London office, and it was automatically translating what they were saying. So they still had the ability to interact. And I think what this will be about, and be about initially, will be about those experiences. You look for certain experiences where this can extend what the experience you're able to offer at home or in the office, and offer those new ways. Megan, your example of whiteboarding was a good one. We need to specifically do something. We're apart. There's reasons why we can't all come together. So there could be a reason around that. One thing that I also did see that really stood out to me, I don't know if you both saw the Horizon Workspace launch that Mark Zuckerberg did on I think it was on an American chat show.
CBS.
And there was a few things equally. So first of all, it was a chat show. It wasn't really a techie show kind of thing, but it was good to see how the host interacted with it and how they're surprised at some of the things were going on. Mark Zuckerberg and I can't remember the female presenter's name were in there, but also with a few other people as well. And a few things that I hadn't really fully comprehended or understood. You watch it on a flat screen, you think, well, it kind of looks like a cartoony meeting kind of thing. Not sure if I like that. But the bit that I thought that video showed quite well was the other areas, the other senses that you were able to get in the meeting by being immersed in it. So Mark Zuckerberg could hear the lady talk to her right, and then someone said something to the other side of the room, and the audio went with the person that was there. That when he was talking to her, he was looking to her right, and you could see what he was doing. At one point he was doing stuff on the keyboard in front of him. And one thing I did kind of think is actually that is quite immersive. I've done kind of Teams meetings, board meetings on Microsoft Teams, and yes, you can hear the people, you can hear them say it, but you lose that sense of being in the room with those people. And I would love to get some Oculus headsets for all of our board, and go into a workspace meeting, see what the different people thought of it once in there. I just thought actually does those different senses, the noises in the background, being able to look up and down, looking at something that's being shared on a screen at the end, and it actually feel like it's being shared on a screen at the end, does that perspective, does that additional context actually really add something? And until I've been able to fully experience that, which I hope to be able to soon, that was just one thing that I thought about. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on if you saw that video.
I
I
did
did
see
see
the
that.
video, and sorry, I was going to say I did see the video, and it was the audio thing that caught my attention as well, because it's not something you really consider, but it looked really interesting. I think as well, like Anthony said, it's the gestures as well. When they were in that meeting, you could see Mark gesturing with his hands, you could see the woman gesturing with hers, although she didn't seem to be able to grasp the sort of handheld sort of remotes that you had. She kept moving them, but you got to see that sort of interaction that they were having with each other. That does, again, make it more realistic, make it more relatable as well.
Yeah, I think the same. It was that, you know, she turned to him and she said, "Oh, I didn't realize you had freckles on your nose," and things like that. And you know, you clearly see it a lot clearer. Although maybe he hasn't got freckles in his nose and he just put them on for novelty value. But
He said he
you
did
know,
have freckles on
he
his
did,
nose.
yes. But I find he looks a little bit like an avatar anyway in reality, which is interesting. But no, I thought that the sound bit, I just, you know, we ought to, as Barry said, we ought to try it and see what it's like, see how much that adds, because you know you always have the thing which is like, you know, verbal communication is only 5% of the actual conversation, and it is all your gestures and your body language, and you know we've probably all sat moving our hands even though they're off screen now. It'd be interesting to see how much the sound bit is an important part of that as well in creating that whole atmosphere, and the ability to bring stuff in that you wouldn't, you know, wouldn't be able to bring into a physical meeting room, and the ability to, you know, show videos and things to a group of people, and talk about them and stop them, and the whole whiteboarding experience. I think, you know, I'm not as cynical as I thought I was going to be. I can see some real business drivers for this. I think HoloLens is a good starting point for a lot of people. Just I remember an example of that where they were, you know, stood beside, I think it was a Land Rover or something like that, and they were, you know, they could see the wiring diagram overlaid on it, that kind of extended reality piece, and they were able to, you know, assist someone in there, which is very similar to the stuff that Barry was talking about earlier. But yeah, I suppose I haven't experienced. I think I've worn a 3D headset, you know, 2 or 3 times, and it's always been a bit of a novelty. But it's a matter of how that turns out in a business environment.
Well, I
Definitely. I
would
think before
say,
we, sorry, go on, Megan.
sorry, I was going to say, whilst we're talking about the workrooms piece, the only thing I did notice when I was sort of doing a bit of research about this, etc., is when Mark Zuckerberg was recording his video, he's obviously very well practiced with it. Everything he did when he switched the layout of the room, etc., it was very slick, it was very smooth, and made it look like a very easy tool to use, and made the experience look quite smooth as well. I then watched someone else who isn't Mark Zuckerberg, just sort of playing with it, demoing it just to see how it works, and sort of reviewing it for his YouTube channel. And he was very jittery when he was using it. His head movements were really jittery when he was clicking stuff with his hand, which you sort of do like you're a crab, was really jittery as well. And I just looked at that and thought, if you're not quite as skilled as Mark or as experienced as Mark Zuckerberg doing it, is the experience actually smooth, or is it a bit jittery and actually not that easy to use? Because I think for people to really engage with it, really enjoy using it and like it, it has to be that smooth experience. I couldn't use it if it was as jittery as the one I watched, because one, it would make me feel sick, and two, it would annoy me how annoying it is to use. So I think maybe, again, we'd have to play with it to see how easy it used, but this guy that I watched made it look a lot harder than I assumed it would be.
Yeah,
I think accessibility is going to be an important thing for it to go mainstream in the workplace. I think the area that we're more likely to see early acceptance is in the gaming industry. I think there obviously already is quite a large following for that. I think Microsoft have just announced that they're buying Activision Blizzard, is it, for £68.7 billion, which is obviously their Microsoft business unit. But Also, I think there's talk around Microsoft saying that there's a lot to be learned in the metaverse from the world of gaming kind of thing. And Microsoft have obviously got a lot of experience in that gaming world, probably more so than Oculus from a meta perspective. And it'd be interesting to see how these things bridge together, how the metaverse will bridge from our personal lives, maybe our children that will be more into the gaming from that side, into work and our adult lives kind of thing. And actually, as the children of today become the workers of tomorrow, do these things naturally become more accepted because they're being brought up with it? So I think that's really quite exciting. We've largely spoken about VR then, so really immersive experience, completely being changing into the world that you are. Anthony, you did briefly mention HoloLens, so AR, the ability to overlay a virtual world on top of your existing world. For me, this is the area that is probably really exciting in the short term. I think it's going to be more difficult for it to be a reality, because if you take an Oculus headset, you can go and pick one up at your local Argos for £299 and probably get playing about in the metaverse today. An Oculus headset is available on, I think, the developer beta programs, and is about £2,500–3,000 from that perspective. But this whole thing of being able to overlay something onto the real world, I think adds another dimension to it. I think, Megan, you saw the videos of Microsoft using this in a hybrid meeting environment and putting some objects on it. I don't know if you want to reflect on what you saw of the Microsoft Mesh demonstration with HoloLens.
Yeah, so I agree that I think it's probably well, it looks like an experience I would probably prefer to use, because you still have your real experience, your real room that you're in that you can see. But in the experience I saw was they had I'm going to say a piece of car. I don't know if it was a piece of car. It looks like a piece of car with like pipes and stuff like that they were looking at and really assessing the sort of build of it. And there was 3 of them in a room. Well, initially there was 2, but inside that meeting they were having, they invited somebody else in by calling her, and the next thing, her avatar walked into the meeting as well, was able to join them. The bit that I really liked about it was you could pick it up and you saw them sort of grabbing it with fingers and pulling it to expand it, moving it round so they could see every angle of it. And it was really sort of a 3D object that they were looking at, which I really enjoyed that piece. But also they could annotate it as well. So they grabbed sort of virtual pens and they were drawing over it. They were pointing to different things, drawing arrows, etc. But the best bit about that was, as soon as they hung up from that meeting, they said that if their developers or their builders that were sort of creating that content and those bits of car were to go and look at that and wanted to see where they left off, they literally just opened it up and they could see all the annotations that the previous people had made. And it's just that next step of collaboration, isn't it? It's that next thing that makes it easier to engage with each other, collaborate on that thing, and then not lose it or have to explain it or email it, God forbid. You just open it up and it's all there again. So it was a really nice way to see that happening. And again, seeing those real world experiences of how they're using it just bring it to life and make you see how relatable this sort of technology can really be.
I think that's those kind of use cases in business where you've got you're creating something. Maybe an architect is creating a building, from people to be able to view that and actually go, can we change that? Can we see how the colors change, the size of this? Can we make that bigger? And be able to all do that within a kind of a shared space will be a real benefit, really increase the speed of people developing things. And when you link that with 3D printing and things like that in a manufacturing environment, for them to be able to design it in effect in that virtual space and then be able to create it physically is going to revolutionize how quick it takes to develop things.
Quick question though. Pieces of car. It was a bit of car, I assume.
I think it was actually a piece of commercial plumbing with some very large valves on it. I think you'd be very surprised if you saw one of those under your bonnet, to be honest.
Well, it shows how much I know about plumbing or cars. The question I have is, that was in a meeting scenario, so they were having that sort of meeting about this bit of plumbing, bit of car. Is there a way to record that? If so, whose point of view do you see that from? Because if I was recording it, but actually it should have been from Barry's, should he have started the recording? I think there's stuff to consider there into how does that work. So just a question I came up with there. I don't assume you guys have the answers, but I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
I think that's a really good point, because ultimately to record from all people's perspective would be a quite a large amount of data that would need to be recorded and to be stored. But ultimately, if we don't worry about the techie stuff, because we don't have to worry about that here on this podcast, it's all about the art of the possible for the users. Ultimately, imagine if it could be recorded from all angles, and then ultimately you were able to replay the meeting and actually go, well, we were talking about it over here, but did you see that when we tilted it this way, this part of it then started to bend? And in the meeting, we weren't looking at it from that perspective, but actually we looked at it over there. So actually, because this is a virtual world with 3D models, there could be new possibilities from just a single viewpoint of something that we saw at the time. We could look at it from multiple different viewpoints.
Yeah. So I go back to my thing. I think there's a time and a place for this, but it's not all the time. You know, I think if we were going to do it, you know, you do a company meeting, that's fine, but we don't need all of that enhancement all the time to do stuff, do we? But I think there will be some real business benefits from it in the right context.
And I think Anthony mentioned earlier about the ability to overlay things like wiring diagrams on top of, or schematics on top of a wiring closet or something like that. I think that the ability to augment what it is that we're seeing adds layers on top of it. But I'm completely with you. I don't see a scenario today where your average employee, your average company has the ability for someone to live in a virtual environment kind of thing and live in a virtual world. There's probably some specialists out there that do spend a lot of their days, even today, in a VR headset. Maybe you're flying a drone for somewhere, some reason, and actually your job is to do that. And the easiest way, best way to do that is have the headset on and be able to look around. There's probably those use cases today, but I think those are niche use cases, specific people that are really able to leverage their skill set anywhere in the world by being immersed in a virtual environment. I'd imagine things like eye fatigue and stuff like that would be a real challenge with those kind of things. But I can't see a scenario where I turn up at an office or I'm part of a company and just in general you spend all day with an augmented reality or a virtual reality headset coming anytime soon, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, a drone pilot thing. I mean, I talked about the Matrix earlier, but I just remember in the film Avatar, there was almost like the air traffic control place was all in 3D, and I don't know whether that was 3D projected off HoloLens or whether it was kind of done in the room, and it was a film anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, you know, the fact they could actually go, oh, this plane's coming in at this angle and this one's coming at this angle. Are they going to hit each other? Well, actually, if I turn them around, I can see it from a different angle, and I know they're not. I can see those kind of, you know, when you've got things interacting with other things, to be able to look at it from different views would be good.
All those old like films that you watch, or not even old, all those films you watch where they've got things cropping up and they're like spinning the world and they're like, oh, they may be here. I can't even think of films now. And you used to watch that and you'd be like, oh yeah, that will never be possible. Now you
Hackers.
watch it and you any chance to mention hackers you would, Barry. But all those films where you watch them and they sort of just bring up, like Iron Man, when he has all those different screens and there's nothing behind him, but it's just like, yeah, and he flicks it off and you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, no way will that ever happen. You now watch it and you think, actually, it's not that will never happen, it's when will that happen, and actually, how close is that to happening? It seems a lot more realistic these days. Although I have never seen The Matrix, I feel like I should have done that in my research for this episode of the podcast.
The other
Still
film that was
really good
mentioned
film,
was Ready Player One. I think was the one that they said first brought about this concept of there being a virtual reality universe, and that's not a film I've watched, so maybe that's one that I need to go away and have a look at. So as we kind of get up towards the time that we like to do for the podcast, I'm going to chuck a question out there that I haven't asked either of you to prepare for, because I know you like me putting on the spot, and I'll go with Anthony first.
always.
If you're speaking to a customer, Anthony, that wants to consider what the metaverse means for their organization and start just considering it, what kind of angles would you go to today with the technology where would you advise them to start looking inside their business?
Megan, what do you think on that? No, I mean, I think from a I think in manufacturing organisations, I'd start talking about the kind of stuff that we've seen already with HoloLens. In creative organisations, marketing companies and things like that. Clearly, there's some work. There's some areas there. I think we'd start to think through what is the art of the possible. What can we deliver now? What is possible in the future, and start to have those kind of conversations with them, because there's some really easy wins here. Things like the headsets that you've been looking at with a camera on it. I don't know how long it's going to be before every headset has a camera on it somewhere, so that you can share what you're seeing with the people in the meeting, as well as you being able to share your face from in front. But those kind of things, that assisted reality, as I think you called it earlier, that makes a lot of sense. If you've got an expert out in the field, but he's not, he's never seen this model of the equipment he's having to maintain, and you can get someone to sit alongside him, see what he's seeing, and tell him whether to cut the red wire or the black wire or the blue wire, etc. Then those kind of things are things that could be delivered now. And so they're kind of the what can be delivered at the moment. They're a practical thing that could be put in place as we see mesh developed, the Microsoft kind of environment. We'll have to see how practical that is. I'd love to see that 3D whiteboarding environment and introduce that to organizations, because I think Microsoft Whiteboard in Teams at the moment is probably one of the most underused things that we regularly train people on. I don't know how many people go and actually use it in anger, and I don't know if you can include external users into that in Teams at the moment, but I think that is promised and is coming. But yeah, I would start from the bottom. What can we do now, and then get their thoughts thinking about what we can do in the future. One of the videos I watched in preparing for this kind of started off as a backdrop with Steve Jobs holding up the iPhone and saying, one day you'll be able to get your music on this, and one day you'll be able to get your email and your calendar, and one day you'll be able to run applications on this. And you kind of think, people then must have gone, wow, it's never going to happen. How are we going to do that? And yet it's just the reality of what we do every day now, and we'd be absolutely lost without it. So yeah, I'd take them through that journey of what's possible now, what's what's promised in the future, and try and avoid the kind of ultimate metaverse conversation where you're getting scammed to pieces by a bloke you think's looks really nice and friendly, but isn't really in the real world.
Megan, have you got any
Catfishing
thoughts on that?
for virtual reality. Yeah, so I think my sort of first thing that I would probably look at when talking about this is the training aspect. So training on sort of physical things. So I actually did, I can't remember if it was it augmented reality when I did it, and
Yes.
I was building a server, and whilst I was building it, it was telling me which bit to put it in, and if I tried to put it in the wrong way, the instructions would come up and tell me the other way. Now for me, I see a real world use case for that, where you haven't got people in the same country or something like that, but they're all going through the same sort of training program. Being able to deliver it on things like that would be really useful, and probably save you a lot of time, cost, and flying people here, there, and everywhere if need be. So I think looking at the sort of opportunities, and then really discovering where maybe there's a problem to start with that it could potentially fix. But for me, I do see that in the sort of training area. I think it could really enhance that.
Definitely. No, I completely agree with both of you. I think from my side of things, there's two ways to tackle this, and I'd probably urge customers to do both. The first is, don't start with the technology, understanding what the technology is, and then trying to think about the use cases. I'd probably say, look at your business, look at your challenges. Where are you having to get specialists to certain environments? What are the user experiences that could be enhanced if we could bring people together? Have a look at your business, the nature of your business, and if only this was possible, we would be able to do X, Y, and Z. So start with a vision. What is it we need, and kind of get that documented, get that kind of broken down. You don't have to be able to achieve a vision today, and you don't have to know how to go out there and do that today. But starting with the vision means that you remove any concepts, preconceptions of boundaries, so you're able to then go out there and see if something could be possible. And then I completely agree with Anthony and Megan. Look for those use cases where today you could introduce virtual reality, augmented reality, or assisted reality technologies into your business, because it will help. And that might just be on a trial basis. Understand how these technologies can be leveraged. I think the metaverse is coming. I think there is significant investment from Facebook, Microsoft, and a huge amount of other people in this space. I think the shape that it will take, we're not yet decided. Is it going to be more gamey than in real world mass work use cases? We're yet to see. I think the technology is a real barrier at the moment. The size of the virtual reality headsets, the cost of the augmented reality headsets. So I'm very much excited to see what Mark Zuckerberg can do in 5 to 10 years, and can we get a pair of Ray-Bans like they've now got the Facebook glasses? They look like Ray-Bans. They've got a little camera built into them. In another 5 years, will they have augmented reality headsets in your Facebook glasses with your prescription lens built into them, and all of that kind of thing? So I think this is a really exciting space. I would urge people not to be limited by their existing preconceptions and their thinking that, well, it's a bit gamey, I don't think this will work for us. But just be open to exploring it. I think it's quite exciting to think what could be possible in these environments before you then get onto the limitations and the concerns maybe.
And I think it's not an all or nothing thing, isn't it? It's not like one day I'm going to put a headset on and that's the end of everything else. You've got to, use these different channels of communication, for in the appropriate ways. I took a client, went with a client up to the Poly Experience Centre in the Gherkin last week, and it's a client I've been working with since the beginning of the lockdown. I spent numerous amounts of time with them on conference calls and things like that. I never met them in person, and it really to actually meet them, it was a bit odd because I felt I knew them, but I didn't. And it makes a big difference when you physically meet someone in a room. They're probably not as tall as you thought they were. Then they've got a different dress sense to what you've seen from the shoulders up. And it's just so important to keep have all of these channels available to you, and use the ones which are most appropriate for that kind of for those meetings and for different activities. So yeah.
Fantastic. Megan, have you got any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think we've said it all. I think it's coming. I think before you start actually opening it up, I think the potential can be really scary. But once you actually start picking it apart a little bit, actually thinking, how could this help me, and see the real benefits and see the real opportunities, I'll call them, it can be really exciting, and I am excited to see where it goes. And hey, in a few years' time, we may be doing this as avatars in a virtual sort of space altogether. You never know.
Well, maybe we'll have to do it sooner rather than later, just to give it a go. Thank you very much, Megan and Anthony, for joining me on this episode of the Adopt 365 podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you go and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, click the like, click subscribe. Remember to tick the bell to be notified of future videos coming as well. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. We look forward to speaking to you next month.
Thank you.